So, let me ask you something real quick. If God is actually real, why does it feel like evil keeps winning? Like, why do the worst people seem to get ahead? It's a question people have been asking forever. And honestly, there's this small, kind of overlooked book in the Old Testament, Habakkuk, that dives straight into that tension. And weirdly, it reads almost like today's headlines. The whole message circles around this idea, don't worry about the wicked, even when it really looks like you should. Okay. So here's where Habakkuk starts. And honestly, it's kind of raw. He's not easing into anything. He just comes straight out and asks God, how long do I have to keep crying out before you do something? And the word he uses there, it's not just like a polite prayer. It's more like shouting, almost screaming. You can feel the frustration in it. He's looking around at everything happening in his world: violence, corruption, people hurting each other, and he's basically saying, are you seeing this? Because I'm seeing it, and it's bad. And then he goes even further. He says, why do you make me look at all this? Like, why am I constantly exposed to this mess? Why is this everywhere? There's plundering, there's destruction, there's conflict, there's tension. It's non-stop. And the part that really gets him is that it feels like nothing is changing. And I think that's the part we relate to the most, right? It's not just that bad things happen, it's that they keep happening over and over. And it starts to feel like, okay, is anyone actually stepping in here? Is anything being done about this? Habakkuk looks at all of it and comes to this really heavy conclusion. He says the law, it's powerless. Some translations say it's paralyzed. Like it's just sitting there, unable to do anything. Justice isn't moving forward, it's stuck. Frozen. And instead of things getting better, it feels like the opposite is happening. He even says that the wicked are surrounding the righteous. So it's not just that evil exists, it feels like it's winning, like it has the upper hand. And because of that, the judgments being made are twisted. They're not fair, they're not right. It's like everything is flipped upside down. And I mean, if we're being honest, that doesn't sound ancient at all. That sounds very now. You don't have to go far to feel that same tension. Turn on the news, scroll through your phone for like 5 minutes, and it's right there. Stories of corruption, injustice, people getting away with things that just feel wrong. And then you see others, good people, struggling, suffering, getting overlooked, and you start asking the same questions. Why does it feel like the wrong people are winning? Why does it seem like justice is so slow, or maybe not even happening at all? Why do people get away with things? And if you've ever thought that even just quietly, you're basically standing right where Habakkuk was standing, that's what makes this so interesting. This isn't a new problem. This isn't something unique to our time or our culture. People have been wrestling with this for thousands of years. Habakkuk lived around 600 BC, and he's asking the exact same questions people are still asking today. Which, honestly, is kind of comforting and unsettling at the same time. Comforting because, okay, I'm not alone in feeling this way. People before me have struggled with this too, but also unsettling because, wait, this has been going on that long. And here's the thing, Habakkuk isn't asking from a distance. He's not just observing the world like, wow, that's unfortunate. No, this is personal for him. He's living in it. He's surrounded by it. This is his community, his nation, his people, and everything feels like it's breaking down. There's violence everywhere. And not just random acts, it's systemic. It's built into the culture. There's conflict between people, constant tension, arguments, division. It's like nobody's at peace. And then there's this sense that truth and justice aren't actually guiding anything anymore. The law, which is supposed to protect people and create order, isn't functioning the way it should. It's either being ignored or manipulated. And so Habakkuk looks at all of this and he can't make sense of it. Because here's what he knows. God is good. God sees everything. So if all of that is true, why is this still happening? That's really the core of his question. It's not just, why is there evil? It's, why is there evil that seems unchecked? And that hits a little deeper, because it's one thing to accept that the world is broken. Most people can acknowledge that. But it's another thing entirely to watch that brokenness play out over and over again and feel like there's no intervention. That's where the tension builds. And again, if you've ever sat with that thought, like really sat with it, you know it can get heavy. You start to question things. Not necessarily in a rebellious way, but just trying to understand, like, God, if you see this, why aren't you stopping it? Or why does it seem like the people doing wrong aren't facing consequences? Or even, why does it feel like the people trying to do right are the ones struggling the most? Those are real questions, and Habakkuk doesn't hide them. He brings them straight to God, and I think that's an important detail. He doesn't pretend everything's fine. He doesn't just ignore what he's seeing. He's honest about it. He's confused. He's frustrated. He's looking at a world that doesn't match what he knows about God, and he's trying to reconcile that. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've seen situations where someone did something wrong, really wrong, and it feels like nothing happened to them. No consequences, no accountability, maybe even the opposite. Maybe they seem to be doing just fine. And at the same time, you see someone else, someone who's doing their best, and they're the ones going through it, struggling, hurting, dealing with things they didn't deserve. And it creates this tension inside you because it doesn't feel fair. And fairness matters to us. Habakkuk felt that same tension, that same sense of, this isn't right. And what makes his words so powerful is that he doesn't filter them. He doesn't try to clean them up or make them sound more spiritual. He just says it like it is. How long? God, why are you letting this continue? Why does it feel like justice isn't happening? And again, those questions haven't gone anywhere. They're still being asked. You hear them in conversations. You see them in comments, in posts, in quiet moments when people are just trying to make sense of things. Sometimes they're spoken out loud. Sometimes they're just sitting in the back of someone's mind, but they're there. And I think part of what makes this section of Habakkuk so relatable is that it gives language to something a lot of people feel, but don't always know how to express. It's that mix of belief and confusion. Like, I believe God is good, but I don't understand what I'm seeing. I believe God is but justice doesn't seem to be happening. I believe God is in control, but everything feels out of control. That's the space Habakkuk is in, and he's not alone in it, and neither are you. This struggle, this tension between what we believe and what we see, it's been part of the human experience for a long time. So when Habakkuk asks why God is allowing sin and injustice to continue, he's not just asking a personal question, he's asking a universal one, a question that echoes across generations. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that it's been asked for so long means it's worth paying attention to how it's handled. But for now, this is where it sits. A prophet looking at a broken world, asking an honest question, and waiting for an answer. So, God actually answers him. And I think that's important to just pause on for a second. Habakkuk isn't just talking into the void. He's not venting into silence. God hears him and responds. But here's where it gets a little unexpected. Because God doesn't come back with something simple or easy. He doesn't say, "Hey, don't worry, I'll fix it tomorrow." He doesn't explain everything in a way that neatly ties it all together. Instead, he says something like, "Look, I am doing something right now, in your own time. Something so big, so unexpected, you wouldn't believe it even if someone told you." And you can almost imagine Habakkuk pausing like, okay, wait, what? Because from his perspective, it looked like nothing was happening. It looked like injustice was just continuing unchecked, like God was silent, like God was inactive. But God's response flips that completely. He's basically saying, you think I'm not doing anything I am, you just don't see it. And honestly, that's a hard answer to sit with, because it doesn't immediately solve the tension. It actually kind of deepens it. Like, okay, you're doing something, but I don't understand it, I don't see it, and whatever you're doing doesn't look like what I expected. And then God gives a glimpse of what he's doing, He says he's raising up the Babylonians, and if you know anything about them, that's not exactly comforting. This isn't like God saying, I'm sending help. It's more like, I'm bringing in a force that's gonna shake everything. Which, again, from Habakkuk's point of view, probably made things even more confusing. Because now it's not just, why is there injustice? It's, wait, this is your plan. But before we even go there, before the next question comes in, I think we need to just sit in this first part of God's response. That line, I am doing something, even if you don't see it, because that hits really close to home. I mean, how many times have you looked at a situation and thought, God, where are you in this? Like, genuinely, not in a dramatic way, just trying to understand. You see something unfold, something painful, something unfair, and it just doesn't make sense. And from where you're standing, it feels like nothing is being done. And maybe you don't say it out loud, but internally you're like, are you working here at all? And this is where God's response challenges that assumption. He's not absent. He's not unaware. He's not sitting back, letting things spiral out of control. He's working, just not in a way that's obvious to us. And that's where it gets difficult, because we tend to define working based on what we can see. If things are improving, if justice is happening quickly, if wrongs are being righted in real time, we go, okay, God's moving. But when none of that is visible, when things actually look worse, we start to question. And God is basically saying, your view is limited, not in a dismissive way, just in a real, honest way. There's a passage where God says his thoughts are not like ours, and his ways are higher. And that can sound kind of abstract at first, but when you put it into a situation like this, it becomes very real. Because what he's saying is, the way I see things, the scope I'm working with, it's beyond what you can fully grasp. And I think part of that is, we couldn't handle it if we did see everything. Like, imagine for a second if you could actually see every detail of what's happening in the world at any given moment. Not just the surface level stuff, but everything behind the scenes. Every intention, every hidden action, every piece of corruption, every act of violence, every broken situation, all at once. That's overwhelming just to think about. I don't think we're built to carry that kind of awareness. And yet, God sees all of it, every moment, every detail. Nothing slips past him, and that changes the way we look at situations. Or at least, it should. Because when we say, God, why aren't you doing anything? We're speaking from a place of limited perspective. We're looking at a snapshot. He's looking at the whole story, and that doesn't always make the pain easier. It doesn't automatically answer every why. But it does shift something. It reminds us that just because we don't understand what's happening doesn't mean nothing is happening. And that's something the speaker in the original message really leans into. He talks about how, honestly, there are things in life we just don't understand. Like, why certain things happen to certain people. Why one person is spared from something and another isn't. Why someone goes through something incredibly difficult while someone else seems untouched. Those are real questions, and they don't always have clear answers. You might look at a situation and think, God, why did you allow that? Or even more personally, why did you allow that to happen to them, but not to me? That's a hard question, and it's honest. And it's something people wrestle with more than they admit. You think about people who have gone through intense experiences, loss, trauma, war, and sometimes there's this lingering question of, why am I here and they're not? That kind of weight doesn't just go away, and it's in those moments that the idea of God working behind the scenes can feel distant. Like, okay, I hear that, but it doesn't feel that way right now. And I think that's why this part of the conversation between Habakkuk and God matters so much. Because it doesn't ignore that tension. It doesn't pretend everything is easy to understand. God doesn't say, here's the full breakdown of everything I'm doing. He just says, I am working. And that requires trust. Which, if we're being honest, isn't always easy, especially when what we're seeing doesn't line up with what we expect. And there's also this other layer to it, which is that God's plan sometimes includes things that feel uncomfortable to us, even confusing. Because again, from Habakkuk's perspective, the situation looked bad. And then God's response, at least at first glance, doesn't immediately make it feel better. It actually raises more questions. But at the core of it, God is making one thing clear. He is not passive. He is not detached. He is actively involved in what's unfolding, even when it doesn't look like it. And I think that's where we have to be careful not to jump ahead too quickly, because the natural reaction is to go, okay, but what exactly are you doing? And that's where Habakkuk is headed next. But before we even get there, this moment right here is important. God is establishing something foundational. He's saying, you can question, you can ask, you can bring your confusion to me, but don't assume I'm absent. And maybe that's something we need to hear too. Because it's easy to look at the world or even just our own lives and feel like things are spinning in ways we don't understand. And when that happens, the silence, or what feels like silence, can be unsettling. But what if it's not silence? What if it's just that we don't have the full picture? What if, in the middle of everything that looks chaotic or unfair, something is actually being set in motion that we can't fully see yet? That doesn't mean everything will make sense right away. It doesn't mean every question will be answered in the timing we want, but it does mean there's more going on than we realize. And that's where this response from God leaves us, not with all the answers, but with a shift in perspective. From nothing is happening to something is happening, even if I don't understand it yet. So, just when Habakkuk starts to process God's first answer, that something is happening behind the scenes, God reveals what that something actually is. And honestly, it kind of makes things worse before it makes anything better. Because God says he's raising up the Babylonians, and Habakkuk hears that, and it's like, wait, hold on. Did I hear that right? Babylon? You mean the violent, ruthless, proud empire that tears through nations, destroys cities, and takes people captive, that Babylon. And suddenly the question shifts. It's not just, why is there injustice anymore? Now it's, God, how can you use them? Like, I was asking why evil is happening, and your answer is more evil. That's the tension. And it's real, because Habakkuk isn't confused about who Babylon is. He knows exactly what they're like. They're not neutral. They're not morally gray. They're openly wicked. So from his perspective, this doesn't feel like justice. It feels like things are about to get worse. And he's basically saying, God, I get that you want to deal with sin. But why would you use a nation that's even more corrupt than we are to do it? It almost feels backwards. Like, shouldn't Babylon be the ones getting judged first? Why are they being used as the tool? And if you slow down and really think about it, this is one of those moments where God's ways don't just feel mysterious, they feel uncomfortable. Because we tend to think in straight lines, right and wrong, good guys and bad guys. If something is broken, you fix it with something better, not something worse. But God's response doesn't follow that logic, and that's where Habakkuk is stuck. He's not questioning whether God is real. He's not even questioning whether God is powerful. He's questioning the method. Why this way? Why them? And honestly, that's a question a lot of people still wrestle with, because sometimes in life, God allows things or uses things that don't fit our idea of how things should work. You see situations where something painful ends up producing something meaningful, but in the moment, it just feels confusing. Or you watch someone who's clearly not doing things the right way somehow become part of a bigger outcome, and you're like, how does that make sense? And that's exactly where Habakkuk is. So God answers him again, but instead of breaking everything down step by step, God goes straight to the heart of it. He basically says, look, I know who Babylon is. I see their pride. I see their corruption. I see everything they're doing. Nothing about them is hidden. And that matters because it means God isn't ignoring their evil. He's not excusing it. He's not pretending they're righteous. They're not, and God makes that clear. He even describes describes them as proud, not upright, not aligned with him at all. But then he draws this contrast, and this is where everything kind of centers. He says, "The just shall live by faith." And it's such a short line, but it carries a lot of weight, because instead of answering every detail about Babylon, God shifts the focus. He moves it from them to you, from what they're doing to how you live. And that's big, because Habakkuk is looking outward, trying to understand what's happening in the world. And God redirects him inward to how he responds. The just shall live by faith. Or in other words, the righteous person, the one who is right before God. They live differently, not by what they see, not by how things look, but by faith. And that word faith, it's easy to hear it and just think belief, like, okay, just believe in God. But that's not all it means here. In the original sense, it carries this idea of firmness, steadiness, reliance. It's not just saying, I believe God exists. It's saying, I'm trusting him. I'm leaning on him. I'm depending on him even when I don't understand what he's doing. It's a steady kind of trust, not emotional, up and down, based on circumstances, but something grounded, something rooted, and that's what God is calling Habakkuk to. Because let's be honest, nothing about the situation makes sense from a human perspective. God is using a wicked nation to bring judgment. That feels wrong. But God is saying, you're not going to figure this out just by analyzing it. You're not going to resolve this tension just by trying to make it logical. You're going to have to trust me. And that's where the shift happens. Because instead of giving Habakkuk a full explanation, God gives him a way to live in the middle of uncertainty. And that's important. Because sometimes we're waiting for answers, when what we actually need is direction. We want clarity, but God gives us trust. We want everything explained, but God says, walk with me. And this idea of the righteous living by faith, it doesn't just stay in this moment. It shows up again later, multiple times, because it's foundational. It's how people are meant to live in relationship with God, not by having everything figured out, but by trusting him even when they don't. And God also makes something else clear here. Babylon is not getting away with anything. They might look powerful right now. They might look unstoppable. They might even look like they're being used successfully. But their story isn't finished. God sees their pride. He sees their violence. And he will deal with it. Just not yet. And that's the part that can feel frustrating. Because Habakkuk wants resolution now. He wants things to make sense now. He wants justice now. And God is basically saying, it's coming. But it's not on your timeline. And that's something we still struggle with. Because when we see something wrong, we want it fixed immediately. We want to see consequences. We want to see things made right. But God works on a bigger timeline. One that takes everything into account. Not just the moment, but the whole story. And so, he's holding both things at once. He's using Babylon in the present. And he's also going to judge Babylon in the future. Nothing is being ignored. Nothing is slipping by. It's just unfolding in a way that Habakkuk doesn't fully understand. And maybe that's the hardest part of all. Not that God isn't doing anything, but that he's doing something we don't fully get. And in that space, the call is to live by faith, to stay steady, to keep trusting, to rely on him even when the picture is unclear. Because the reality is, we don't always get the full explanation. We don't always get to see how everything connects in real time, but we're still invited to trust the one who does. And that's where Habakkuk is left in this moment. Still with questions. Still with tension. But now with something to hold on to. Not a complete answer, but a clear direction. The righteous shall live by faith. So here's where this starts to get really personal, because up to this point, Habakkuk has been asking some hard questions. Right? And maybe you've been tracking with him, thinking, yeah, I've asked those kinds of things too. But now there's this shift, not in the situation, but in what we do with those questions. Because there's a really important distinction here that we can't miss. There's a difference between asking God questions and questioning who God is. And that might sound subtle at first, but it's actually huge. Because asking God questions that's human. That's honest. That's what Habakkuk is doing. He's looking at the world. He's confused. He's frustrated, and he brings all of that straight to God. He's not pretending everything's fine. He's not hiding his emotions. He's not filtering his thoughts to sound more spiritual. He's real. And here's the key, he brings it to God. He doesn't take his questions somewhere else. He doesn't start building a case against God in public. He goes directly to him, and that matters. Because when you ask God questions, you're still in relationship with him. You're still acknowledging him. You're still leaning in, even if it's messy. But questioning who God is, that's different. That's when the foundation starts to shift. That's when it moves from, God, I don't understand what you're doing, to God, are you even good, or are you even real? Or can I even trust anything about you? And once that line gets crossed, things can start to unravel pretty quickly. And that's exactly what the speaker in the original message warns about. There's this progression, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. It starts with a complaint. And again, complaining in itself isn't the issue. We all do it. Life is hard. Things don't make sense. People get hurt. Situations feel unfair. You bring that to God, that's okay. But if that complaint just sits there, if it starts to grow, if it's not brought to God, but instead just kind of just circles in your mind, it can turn into questioning. And again, questioning isn't automatically bad either. Asking why is natural, but if those questions aren't anchored in trust, if they start drifting away from God instead of toward him, then something else starts to happen. Doubt creeps in. And doubt, it's tricky because it doesn't always show up loud and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. It's just a thought, a little voice in the back of your mind. Is this actually true? Can I really trust this? Maybe there's another explanation. And again, having a moment of doubt doesn't make you a bad person. Even people in the Bible wrestled with doubt. But what you do with that doubt, that's what matters. Because if you start feeding it, if you start building on it, it doesn't just stay at the level of doubt, it moves into drifting. And drifting is dangerous because you don't always realize it's happening. It's not like one day you wake up and go, I'm done with everything I believe. No, it's gradual. You stop engaging the way you used to. You start pulling back. You become a little more distant, a little more disconnected. Maybe you're still around, but something's off. And the longer that goes on, the more open you become to other voices, other ideas, other influences. And eventually, if nothing interrupts that pattern, it can lead to disbelief, where someone just says, I don't believe this anymore. And when you see that from the outside, it can feel sudden, like, wait, what happened? But it didn't start there. It started way back with a small complaint that was never brought to God. And that's where this connects so directly to our world right now. Because the way people process their struggles today is very different than it used to be. Instead of bringing those questions to God, a lot of people bring them to the internet. And I get it. It feels easier sometimes. You're hurting, you're frustrated, you feel misunderstood, and you want someone to hear you, so you post it, you tweet it, you share it, and suddenly people are responding. I feel the same way, and that happened to me too. You're right to feel that way. And there's this sense of validation. But here's the problem. Your validation doesn't always lead to truth. Sometimes it just reinforces the hurt. And instead of moving toward healing, it can actually push you further into that progression complaint. Questioning, doubt, drifting, and you see it play out in real time. There's this whole trend, maybe you've noticed it, where people talk about deconstructing their faith. And again, at the surface level, that can sound like someone just trying to work through questions. But in many cases, it's gone further than that. People start pulling apart everything they once believed, sometimes even publicly. Posting videos, writing posts, sharing their process in real time, and in some cases, it ends with them saying, I don't believe any of this anymore. And the original message points out something really important. None of those people got there overnight. It didn't just happen in a day. It started somewhere small, a question, a hurt, a moment of confusion, and instead of bringing that to God, it went somewhere else. And maybe part of it is real pain. Church hurt is real. People have been let down, misunderstood, even wronged, and that shouldn't be ignored. But the way we respond to that pain matters. Because one of the examples the speaker brings up is this trend of people sharing what their church did to them. And then others join in, and that happened to me too. Same here. And it becomes this collective space of hurt. And again, there's something human about that. But the question is, does it lead to healing, or does it just keep the wound open? Because Habakkuk gives us a different model. He's hurting, he's confused, he's frustrated, but he takes it straight to God, not to the crowd, not to public opinion, to God. And that's the challenge here. When something doesn't make sense, when something hurts, when you feel like you've been wronged, where do you take it? Do you broadcast it, or do you bring it to God? Because those two paths lead to very different places. One keeps you anchored, the other can slowly pull you away. And again, this isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's not about suppressing questions. It's about where those questions go. Because if they go to God, there's space for growth, there's space for clarity, there's space for healing. But if they go everywhere else first, it becomes a lot harder to find your way back. And that's why this matters so much, because we're living in a time where there are more voices than ever, more opinions, more perspectives, more noise. And if you're already in a place of doubt or confusion, it's really easy to get swept up in that, to start believing whatever sounds convincing in the moment. And before you know it, you've drifted further than you ever intended to. And maybe the most important reminder in all of this is that God isn't afraid of your questions. He's not intimidated by your doubts. He's not pushing you away when you're struggling. He actually invites you to come to Him, but He also calls you to hold on to who He is, to not let your questions redefine His character. You can ask why. You just don't redefine who. And that's the balance. That's what keeps everything from unraveling. Because once who God is becomes unstable in your mind, everything else starts to fall apart. But if that foundation stays solid, even when you don't understand what He's doing, you can keep moving forward. You can keep trusting. You can stay grounded. And that's exactly what Habakkuk models. He questions. He wrestles. He brings real concerns, but he never lets go of who God is. And that's what keeps him from drifting. And maybe that's the takeaway for us here. Not to ignore the hard questions, not to pretend everything is easy, but to make sure we're bringing those questions to the right place, because where you take your questions will shape where you end up. And then something shifts. Not the circumstances, not the situation around Habakkuk. None of that suddenly gets fixed. But his perspective changes. And you can feel it the moment you step into chapter 3. Because instead of more questions, instead of more frustration, what comes out of him is a prayer. Actually, it's more like a song. And that's kind of surprising, right? Because just a moment ago, at least, it feels like a moment ago, he's wrestling, he's asking, he's trying to understand how any of this makes sense. And now, he's worshiping, not because everything suddenly became clear, but because something settled in his heart. He didn't get all the answers he was looking for, but he got enough of God to keep going. And I think that's important to notice, because sometimes we think the turning point comes when everything finally makes sense. But here, the turning point comes when trust takes root. And you hear it right away. He says, "Lord, I've heard what you said, and I'm honestly afraid." And I love that he says that, because it's real. He's not pretending to be fearless. He's not acting like everything is fine. He hears what's coming, and it shakes him. And that's okay, because faith doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you know what to do with that fear. And what Habakkuk does next is really the beginning of this shift. He says, "God, revive your work, make it known, and in your wrath, remember mercy." That line right there, it's like he's anchoring himself. He's saying, I know judgment is coming. I know things are going to get hard, but I also know who you are. And that becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Because from here, he moves into this reflection, this remembering. And that's the first part of the takeaway. Remembering the past, not in a nostalgic way, but in a grounding way. He starts thinking about what God has already done, how God has shown up before, how he's been faithful, how he's delivered his people, how he's acted with power and justice and mercy all at the same time. And he starts describing it almost like a scene unfolding, God moving like a warrior, God stepping into history, God rescuing, God making a way where there was no way. And even though Habakkuk wasn't physically there for those moments, he knows the story. He knows what God did for his people. And that memory becomes fuel for his faith. Because when everything around you feels uncertain, one of the most powerful things you can do is look back and remember what's already been proven. Not what you hope might happen, but what you know has happened. And maybe you've experienced that too, where you look back at your own life and realize, wait, God has come through before, maybe not in the way you expected, maybe not on your timeline, but he showed up, he was faithful, he didn't abandon you. And those moments, they matter, because they remind you that you're not dealing with an unknown God, you're dealing with a God who has a track record, and that's what Habakkuk is holding on to. He's basically saying, I've seen enough, or at least I've heard enough, to know that you are who you say you are. You've been faithful. You've been merciful. And if that's true in the past, then maybe, just maybe, it's still true now, even if it doesn't look like it. And then the tone shifts again, because after remembering the past, he acknowledges the future. And this part is heavy. Because now he's not just thinking about what God has done, he's thinking about what's coming, and it overwhelms him. He says his body trembles, his lips quiver. It's like the weight of it all hits him at once. What God revealed earlier, it's not light. It's not easy. There's real hardship ahead, real consequences, and he feels it physically. And again, that's honest, because sometimes faith isn't calm and composed. Sometimes it looks like shaking hands and a racing heart and just trying to breathe through the moment. And yet, even in that state, he says something incredible. He says, I will wait, I will rest. And that's the second part, resting in the future. Not because the future looks easy, but because he trusts who's in control of it. He knows that even though Babylon is coming, even though things are going to unfold in ways he doesn't fully understand, God will still judge righteously. God will still make things right. And that gives him a kind of quiet strength, not loud confidence, not certainty about every detail, but a settled trust. Like, I don't have to figure everything out right now. I can wait. I can let God do what he's gonna do. And that's hard, because waiting is hard, especially when you've been wronged, especially when something feels unjust. You want resolution. You want answers. You want things to be fixed. But Habakkuk is saying there's a place where you can rest even before that happens, because you know that God sees everything. You know that nothing is slipping through the cracks. And you know that one day, everything will be made right. And the original message even touches on that bigger picture, that there's a future where God fully steps in, where everything is set right, where justice is complete. And even though Habakkuk couldn't see all of that clearly, he trusted that it was coming. And that trust allowed him to rest, even while things were still uncertain. And then we get to the third part, and this is where it all comes together. Because now it's not just about the past or the future, it's about right now, the present moment. And this is where Habakkuk says something that, honestly, feels almost impossible at first. He paints this picture. The fig tree doesn't blossom. The vines produce no fruit. The olive crop fails. The fields are empty. No food, no flocks, no herds. It's a complete picture of loss, of lack, of everything not working the way it's supposed to. And if you translate that into today's terms, it's like saying, what if everything falls apart? What if your plans don't work? What if your finances collapse? What if your relationships break down? What if the things you were counting on just fail? What if it all looks barren and right there, in that reality? Habakkuk makes a choice. He says, yet I will rejoice. And that yet is everything. Because it means his joy isn't tied to the outcome. It's not dependent on things going well. It's not based on circumstances improving. It's rooted in something deeper. He says, I will rejoice in the Lord. Not in the situation. Not in the hardship. But in God, I will take joy in the God of my salvation. And that's the third part, rejoicing in the present. even when nothing around you looks like it deserves celebration. And let's be honest, that's not easy. That goes against everything we naturally feel. And because when things are falling apart, the last thing you want to do is rejoice. But Habakkuk isn't ignoring reality. He's not pretending things are good when they're not. He's acknowledging it fully. The fields are empty. The crops have failed. There's no provision. He sees it clearly. And still, he chooses joy. Not because the situation changed, but because his perspective did. Because now, instead of focusing only on what's missing, like he's focused on who God is. And that's what allows him to say something like, God is my strength, not the circumstances, not the outcome, God. And he even uses this imagery like God giving him feet like a deer, helping him stand on high places. It's this picture of stability, of being able to stand even in difficult terrain, even when things feel unstable. And that's really the heart of it. Habakkuk doesn't get a perfect explanation. He doesn't get a timeline. He doesn't get a guarantee that everything is going to feel okay. But he gets something better. He gets a deeper trust, a clearer view of who God is, and that changes everything. And because now he can remember the past and say, God, you've been faithful. He can look at the future and say, God, you will make things right. And he can stand in the present and say, God, I will still choose you, even here, even now. And maybe that's the invitation for us too. Not to have everything figured out, not to understand every situation, but to remember, to rest, and to rejoice, to look back and see where God has already been faithful, to look ahead and trust that he will be just, and to stand right here in whatever we're facing and still choose joy. Not because life is perfect, but because God is still good. So maybe that's where this lands. Don't get stuck staring at the wicked, even when it feels unfair. Pray for them, honestly. Trust that God sees everything, even the parts you don't, and that nothing goes unnoticed. And if you've been hurt, yeah, God sees that too. You're not ignored. Just keep walking, even if it's slow, even if it's messy. Keep walking by faith. And if this helped you think a little deeper, you can stick around for more like this.